Okay, hello everybody this morning. Autumn is coming, it's raining. That's like it is here at the sea. Macroeconomics, and last time we started with often criticized, but still the main indicator in order to measure economic performance. We start to talk about GDP. Quite often I'm just telling you when we are talking about GDP, this is the worst economic indicator in order to measure economic performance with exception of everything else. So of course, when we are talking about this, we will also criticize it. What can we measure? What can we not measure with this indicator? But anyhow, there is no better. And this is quite often what we have to identify. What can we best do? And we wish, of course, quite often much more, but we have to see what can we get out of the data. So please keep this in mind. If in the end of the lecture, then you get some revision questions from me, and in an exam, quite often I have a general question about economic growth, economic performance, and of course this relies on gross domestic product, and then you should know within an exam, and I think you also should know in general if you are studying economics, what is GDP about? And for this, you have to know just the definition. Well, this has not to be this exact definition what I give you here. There are others which are meaning the same, but in general, we find there always these points: total market value, finished goods which are produced within a country's border within a specific time period. Well, and unfortunately, if you are asking artificial intelligence, since you get a probabilistic answer, this answer could be wrong. Or, so to speak, there is missing something. If you go to Wikipedia or so, there you get in the first part, in the starting part, about GDP, the right answer. This is the difference between some lexica and artificial intelligence. And this you always have to keep in mind when you are using artificial intelligence to do your work. I really recommend that you start using artificial intelligence, because then you can be much faster. And of course, the other way around, you are thinking about some problem, and then you see, well, I consider due to this problem maybe 4 or 5 points, and then you are asking artificial intelligence, and sometimes then you get also a fifth and a sixth point, which is also related to your problem and which is important. You get back from artificial intelligence where you didn't have think about in a first step. But you always have to think about the answers you get from artificial intelligence. So this just for a general introduction. So gross domestic product is total market value of all finished goods and services produced within a country's border in a specific time period. And well, there's maybe the first criticism, or we could also think about another concept. which seems, yeah, more or less also plausible, that we just interchange countries' borders with the people, the companies which belong to the countries. And you are studying international business studies, and I think not everybody of you is a German citizen. Well, and I think most of you are working here somehow part-time. So all of you are within counted countries' borders. Your income is counted for GDP, but it wouldn't be counted for the national product. And we did it with some examples, Luxembourg and Netherlands, where this distinction really matters. For Germany, it's about 0.51% if you count everything together. So it doesn't really matter if you're measuring economic performance with gross national product or gross domestic product. But if you take other countries, this can really make a large difference. Which concept? And both concepts are plausible. And for this, you always, if you take some aggregated numbers, and we are dealing here in macroeconomics with aggregated numbers, you always have to identify your problem and then ask yourself which aggregated numbers are useful to get an answer, to get a good answer for my problem. Yeah, so this is then, so to speak, the first difference. And now we want to go to all these, finished goods, to all these important points within our definition. Market value. So somehow we want to measure it within some comparable unit. And yeah, the first shot, what we do is produced milk. Here we have a large agricultural sector in Lower Saxony. And this would be then that we go to the supermarket, and within a year, maybe we are drinking 100 liter or more milk a year, and then we are looking what is the average market price the last year of a liter milk. So, and then we have already some problems in the statistics, because for some goods we don't find directly average market prices in the last year. Think of goods which have a very long production process, more than 1 year. Maybe there are very large products, they are not sold the last year, but they are produced. So, and then we need something to estimate the market value of these products. Well, and then I think you can go also to your business administration lectures where you start to calculate, well, what kind of price should I give my product within my company? With which price should I go to the market? Well, and what you are doing then is you are adding up all your inputs. These inputs you have bought, or also take the wages of your people working in your company, and then you are summing up all these costs. And then you say, well, of course, well, there are also Sometimes you think strategically that you go into the market with a lower price, but in general, within your company, you would say, well, at least I want to have my costs out of it when I'm starting to sell my products. And for this, if we don't have a market price, then we think as an estimation in order to get this product within grow domestic products. We say, well, then we value these products with production prices. Yeah, and then within the circular flow, we had our sector government. We will see that government is about 20-30% of grow domestic products. Well, what are we in general producing as a government within the whole economy? Well, mainly services. This is military, this is general security within our country. That we are living within a democracy, this is costly. So there are many people working in general. So the input cost, so to speak, is mainly the wages of these people which are working in the public sector. So what we are producing, or what hopefully I produce for you, is hopefully a good education. And I'm paid by the public. And so valuing this product in general would mean that we look at what is the sum of the wages in the public sector. And so for public services, we take as an estimation, because of course there is no market for these general public services. We sum up all the wages paid within this sector and take this as an estimation for what could be the market value. And then, of course, this I missed here, and this I have to do here also. All this little word is also very important, and this is maybe the most criticized thing within our definition, because, well, could we really catch all goods and services? And there we have to admit, well, in practice we cannot catch really all goods and services. Well, we again can try. If we get no market for these, how can we do it? And especially if we look that we are living in our flats, in our houses. And quite often we are the owner of these houses. Well, and then in your own calculation, you are paying no rent to yourself. Well, and there, I hope that you have already heard from this concept, opportunity costs. What are opportunity costs? This is one of the main concepts in economics, and this you really should keep in mind. What is opportunity cost? Yeah. Yes, yeah, great. So you are taking everything in a row, what you could do, and then you are doing something. And here, in this example, what you are doing, you have bought or your parents have bought 15 years ago a house, a flat or something like this, and then you are living there. This you have chosen. Then you are paying for the last 10, 15 years no rent. But what are the opportunity costs? The opportunity cost that you are living within your own flat, not paying a rent, is that you just give your flat away. Somebody else is living there and is paying you every month a rent. So you don't get the rent because you are not giving your flat away to somebody else. Well, and for this we say all these people who live in your own residential property, this we put also in GDP. That way, compared to this, we are estimating some market price that we just say, well, we have an average rent within the market, and so we value all the people living in their own property with the average market rent. Well, but then there is, of course, also something which we hardly can count statistically in practice. And if we have this general problem, then we have to admit we cannot count it. And what is it? Well, also in our countries, there is a black market. Many things are produced and we don't get the data. Say, for example, your neighbor is an engineer and you are quite good in something else, and then you are directly interchanging these goods. And of course, these goods are produced. So if we say all, these goods should be within GDP. Or of course, look especially at our country. I don't think that our country would really work without all these people having honorary posts. Well, I'm a football trainer of some children. What do I get? I think 90 euros per half a year, per one season. Well, it's very, really much fun doing this. But of course, if you go then to Werder Bremen or somewhere else, they're the coaches of the young guys. They are paid, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 euros a month. Well, I'm not that good that I would earn this. But there you see, there is done very much within a country which really should be within GDP, but you cannot count it. And also very, very large the educational performance of parents, or what you are doing if your parents are old, then you are caring for them. And all these things are not within GDP, and of course we can say that these things, if we want to measure the welfare within a country, should be in GDP. And while of course this is one of the main criticism of GDP, that all these things we cannot count within GDP. And this we really have to keep in mind. And well, there are for developed countries some rough estimations how much can we consider with the black market, and don't take the number now too seriously, because Of course, it's very hard to estimate this, but this could be 10 to 15% of GDP, of the number we get with all the other things out for the economic performance. But of course, we can go to other countries, no democracies, and there we really can think there can be this, so to speak, black market, or what is not officially counted can be much larger relative to the total economic performance. Okay, so really keep this in mind. We just write down all, but we have to admit we cannot count all. Okay, then also very important, finished goods. Why we are doing this? Well, we want to measure economic performance, and in order to get some measurement somehow for welfare of our economy. And of course, let's take again our automobile industry in Germany. There are produced many goods before we end up with the car. The wheels, the seats, all the electronics which are in modern cars. And they are not produced, or quite often not produced, by the car factories. They are produced by some other firms, and they are sold to the car factories. There we have a money flow from one company to another. So, market value of goods and services. So in this case, we would count them into GDP. But what would we do then? Then we would count these goods more or less twice. They are produced, then they are in the car, then this car is sold, and we pay a price to the company who is selling this car, who has already paid the other goods we find within the cars. So this price goes up, and then we would double these products, more or less. And therefore we say, well, we only want to count what are we consuming in the end. So when I ask this question, quite often some guys of you just forget this word, finished goods and services. And this is really important. I will show you also some numbers when we do not take this in mind, keep this in mind, and how large would then the so-called production value overall in Germany. Well, of course, goods and services, this we have also to say, this would be, material and immaterial goods. And for this we have already talked about national versus domestic concept, and just the difference would be factor incomes of non-citizens in the considered countries plus factor incomes of citizens of the considered countries. So if we are working abroad, or if somebody else is not a citizen of our country and is working within our borders, and a specific time period. In general, when we are talking about GDP, a number, what is GDP of United States, of Germany, of France, what else, then we think of 1 year. In general, we find data every quarter. Okay, so this is GDP, and now we want to get out a number. And in order to get a number, we can use three different approaches. Well, the first one comes more or less directly from the definition. Every goods and services produced, finished goods and services produced within a country and within a specific period. So this would be then somehow our supply side. What is produced in all our companies and what is produced in the public sector. Altogether, if we think of our market concept, this you hopefully have already seen, increasing supply function. So what is behind these supply function? And in a minute, demand on the other side. If the market is well functioning, then we have this equilibrium. This would be then our market value. And what is then coming here from the supply side, this we can add up, and this would be the production approach. So value added, we will also see what is the difference between value added and GDP in the end. This I will show you in a minute. Value added of all economic sectors or activities. So this would be the supply side. Well, then think of the circular flow. We are producing within the companies or the public sector all these goods and services. And on the other side, we are paid for these goods and services. And what we are doing with our wages? Well, we are buying these goods and services. So, and this means we take our income, which is coming out of the production, and then we have some preferences. Think of your microeconomics lecture. And due to these preferences, we go to the supermarket, we go in some store, and we are buying something. And in behind this, how much can we buy? Well, how much income do we have? And therefore, this is the expenditure approach. So the final uses of goods and services, in general, then, of course, the largest part, consumption. And then we divide this something we directly consume, and we are also investing, and especially the companies, the enterprises are investing. Government expenditures and circular flow, you know it. We are not alone in the world. There would be some, in general, some difference between what we are buying from abroad and what we are selling to abroad. So this would be, so to speak, the demand side. Well, and then there is a third one, and this would be the so-called income approach. I already mentioned we are working, getting wages, and in general, we think of two main production factors. And what are these main production factors? This is labor and capital. I think you have also already seen something like a production function. F of K and L. So this would be our output, roughly GDP. everything what we are producing with these two main production factors. And then we can ask, oops, how much income is due to labor and capital. And well, this is the wage income, and this are the capital income. So here we could in general say this is the profits which the companies are making. Profits of enterprises. And this is in general the total income within an economy when we are hired at the by the companies. And you would get an income of profits when you are the owner, when it is your own company. But of course, also a single person could be hired by a company getting a wage income. And if you are going to the stock markets and you get a dividend, then you are also participating by from these profits. Okay, so and now we want to go to the data. So these are the actual numbers for Germany, and there you see, and you, especially for the exam, you have not to recapitulate all the exact numbers, but yeah, somehow roughly where will it be? So GDP, there you can say roughly 4 billion euros. And then we come from all these different sides, and let's start with the production approach. And then, of course, we start with all goods and services which we have produced. Not keeping in mind that in the end we want to have the finished ones. What have we produced in the last year in Germany? And there you see, this is roughly twice as large as GDP in the end. So this is the production value, roughly 2 times GDP. Well, of course, then we have to subtract all these intermediate goods. Automobile sector, the wheel is produced and then is goes to the car factory, and then because without wheels we cannot drive. All these intermediate consumptions. This is of course then roughly as large as the GDP. Oh, this is German still, sorry, and this has to be then value added. Hopefully on the next slides, yeah, grow value added. And we sum, and then we do not directly end at GDP, but we end at grow value added, because then the public sector steps in, and there we have general distortion, and this we had also in the circular flow. Think of the interdependencies between the government sector and households and the enterprises. We have to pay taxes and we get subsidies. And then we just take the difference of these two aggregators, so plus taxes minus subsidies, and then we end up at gross domestic product. So if we, on the next slide, then go to the different sectors which are producing within our country, then you have to keep in mind that the numbers we get, the relative numbers we get out, are calculated relative to gross value added and not calculated relative to GDP. So then, expenditure approach. There we see the main part is, of course, private consumption. And then we have two parts which have roughly the same size. This is government consumption and investments. And then especially for Germany here, we are still one of the main exporters in the world. But I already said to you, for 24, this difference will shrink. But here still we have that roughly exports are roughly 100 billion euros. Sorry, we are here in the English course, so it's not billion, it's trillion. I think the German ones know the difference, that within the UK, United States, we are counting a little bit in another way than in Germany. So for the guys who don't know it, and if you are reading German sources, we have millions or Millionen, Milliarden, Billionen, and in UK or in the English part there we directly come to billion, so million, billion, trillion. Sorry. Yeah, and then we come from below, taking the income approach, and what we see then is, of course, we coming not directly to GDP. So from the expenditure approach, you see we come directly to GDP, summing all the parts together, and here we see roughly the compensation for the employees when we are hired at the enterprises. They are roughly twice as large as the profits, so corporate and investment income. And if we take these numbers together, then also keep in mind we do not end up at GDP, but we end up at so-called national income. So also a typo here. Oops. Then we have also distortion, taxes and subsidies. This would be then net national income. And then I think you have talked about, hopefully also in your introductory courses, that one main part in the calculation in companies is that you have all your things for the production within your company, And then you know, well, over time, these things become older and older and older, and after 5-10 years, I cannot use them anymore, especially here, this one, a laptop, a computer or something. I think you just interchange these things within 3 or 5 years because the technology changes, which in these electronic parts are really, really fast. Think also of your handy. I think maybe you are interchanging your handy every year because you almost cannot use it anymore because the capacity which your handy has cannot take the next step of the movies or something like this, what you want to see on it. So, and because of this process, you have to keep this in mind. You have the large part of depreciation of all these things within your production process. And here you see that these depreciations add up also to a significant high number, which is somehow roughly 20% of GDP. Then grow national product. About this we have already talked a lot, and here you see it. It's roughly 100 billion euros, and this is of course much less. So relative to 4 trillion, so this is, I would say, roughly 0.5% of GDP. So it does not really matter for Germany in order to calculate economic performance. So then let's go to the aggregates, and this I mentioned because I introduced especially the circular flow that 200-300 years ago the main production part within an economy was the agricultural sector. And now if we take the agricultural sector, then you see here relative to grow value added, it is only roughly 1%. If you go to France, for example, there it would be a little bit more, but also not more than 2%. And this you find more or less in all developed countries, that the agricultural sector is never larger than 2 or 3% relative to grow value added. Well, if you go back last January, then you know what these people can do within our economy, especially in our region here, when they stopped maybe all the traffic for some weeks. And on the other hand, you see what they can do in the public and what is, so to speak, their importance for the economic performance of the economy as a whole. Well, then, and about this we talk right now quite a lot, is if we take the manufacturing sector, and this is especially a large part of this is our automobile sector in Germany. And here you see that this one is roughly 25%. So 1/4, and this is compared to other developed countries, a very large number. If we go to France, if we go to UK, then this part is less than 20%. Well, is it good or bad? And always the answer is it depends. Right now, because of the problems, especially in the automotive sector, this is criticized. Well, why is Germany that much relying on the sector? If we go 15 years back, just after the global financial crisis, well, financial sector is goods and services. If we go to the UK, the financial sector in UK made in 2008, 2009 almost 10% of their GDP. In Germany, it was roughly 4%. So UK was much more hit by the global financial crisis, and especially Germany came out very fast in 2010 out of this crisis just 15 years ago. Well, and what we said, what was the reason? Well, our large manufacturing sector, because especially after the global financial crisis, the emerging markets just stepped in, said, well, we are still want to increase our industry. We want still to develop. And what did they need? For building all their factories, they needed especially the products which we are producing in our manufacturing sector. So in these times we said, well, it is not that good to have a large financial sector, a large goods services sector in this part. It is good. Right now we have these problems because also because of the digitalization that we have within our classical automotive sector, a large change. Now it seems to be a problem. So this also means quite often, do not say this is good or bad. You have always to look at the circumstances. But what is good always to know these numbers. So then the construction sector in general, there in 2023 it's 6%, but I will give you also here some rough numbers that which you can keep in mind, which are I think is easier to recapitulate, and of course these numbers are fluctuating. So construction sector we say is just roughly 5% within our country. And yeah, this is compared sometimes to other countries also yeah, a small number. And if we also go back to the global financial crisis, and maybe somebody is coming from Spain here to our nice, not that warm country. If we looked just before the financial crisis to Spain, Spain performed between 2000 and 2008 very well. Well, and one reason was they were building up their country. They hadn't had this infrastructure which we already had. They really built and built and built. And their construction sector was up to 20% of GDP. And right now, because we are talking right now about it, in the beginning of the 2000s, Germany was somehow within a crisis. And what was that then? Well, look at Spain and other countries. They are speeding up. They are investing in their infrastructure. They are building new houses. And therefore they perform economically quite good. But what happened then? For roughly 10 years, it was maybe a good decision. But what then happened? We had this housing bubble in general in the world, and then of course also in Spain. And this bubble bursts, 20% of GDP, and this meant, okay, within this crisis again, Spain really deeply dropped. And what also happened, and for this you can think about it, in this time period, many young people in Spain in this period, 2000 to 2005, they made a decision. Should I educate with 18, 19, 20 years, or should I directly start to work, especially in the construction sector, earning really good wages? And for this, many young people in Spain didn't educate themselves. And for this, after the global financial crisis, we had a really large unemployment within the young people. And this, of course, is again not good for the economic performance overall. But again, is it good or bad to have a large construction sector or not? Stepping back to Germany, then we have to admit, especially within the last 10 years, I think we can really say it, and maybe this is now a positive point and not a normative point. If we look around, if we look at the bridge in Dresden, we do not have invested enough in our infrastructure. And there we have to admit, until Corona, our economic performance was quite good, and maybe we should have invested more in infrastructure in the construction sector. So again, always it depends, but you have to know, I think, these numbers. Then, to end up this, wholesale retail trade, roughly 15%, and of course the largest part, private and public services, that we are at 100%, then we need here roughly 55%, actual 52. So, and since I said I want also to always to show you a historical perspective, because for an analysis it is always quite good to take the view backward. Where are we coming from? And then data starting at 1970. Then in general what we see here is this general change of our economies, especially in developed countries, that if we go back 50 years, the manufacturing sector was the largest part with 40%, goods and services 30%, and this in the next 4 decades changed now to more or less the situation we have right now, because here you see what I said, and let's take these numbers again, roughly 55, roughly 25, 15, and 5%, that this, the last roughly 20 years, stayed more or less constant. But I think especially due to digitalization, maybe within these parts here is in the next year there happens something. So we could think of that many new services could be invented due to digitalization, and also if we look at mobility in general, if there is something changing, that then the manufacturing part of GDP in Germany will drop, and maybe the service part will increase. But we have to wait what the numbers in the next year will show. Then let's go to the expenditure approach, and I already mentioned it when we were talking about within the circular flow. especially about unplanned or unexpected investments, so changes in inventory. We find here that in 2023 we had roughly 50 billions of relative to GDP is in the actual situation roughly 0.1 percentage points. Not points, percentage. I come in a minute to percentage points. So what does it mean in the actual situation? If we keep everything else constant, and what we want to do is to talk then in the end about economic performance, so about economic growth. If we keep everything else constant and we look only at the change of inventory, then in the actual situation, our country would increase by 0.1 percentage points. Well, that's not very much, so we could think it doesn't matter. But here I showed you, oops, the time series of the change of inventories. And then we see, especially here in Corona times, and also if we go back to the global financial crisis, this turmoil, and also you have to keep in mind in the last years we had large price, we had large inflation rates, so the prices really rose in the last years, and this means within these times we had roughly 3 trillion euros GDP. And here during Corona times 100. So what can be the case is that inventories could make, or changes in inventories could make roughly 0.5 percentage points of economic growth, especially in a crisis. And if we think of, maybe you have already heard of it, I will show this also maybe today or 9:20, no, not today, then next week, that for developed countries, we say we are growing, if in a normal situation, roughly between 1 and 2%. And then you see that inventories could make almost half of the total growth. And this one should also keep in mind in order to interpret growth rates if you are reading them in the media. Okay, but also here what I would mention in general, what you should keep in mind in the general numbers. So private consumption, we could say actual in the actual situation roughly 50%. All these together, and government consumption, they are roughly the same. So roughly, let's say this one is a bit larger, 22%, this 23%, and then we need also the rest. So this would be roughly 5%. Well, this especially during the last 5 years changed, and this is also now within the political discussion. Let's go just in the end of the global financial crisis. Then we see this was the private consumption was a little bit larger, roughly 5.5%. Here, these two, 20%, 20%, and net exports still roughly 5%. But what we see is that the part of private consumption relative private consumption dropped over the last 10 years from 55% to roughly 50%. Well, and why did I say that this is important, especially for political economic discussion? Well, we are somehow in this discussion. One part of the politicians, they say, well, let's get back to market, let's do the economic performance be done by the private sector, by the companies, because they're doing it better. And on the other hand, we say, well, we have the change in mobility, we have climate change, where we need very large investments, where we have to change our framework of our country. And then the argumentation is this cannot be done by the private sectors. This has to be public investment. And I think this will be one of the main economic discussions in the next years, especially in the developed countries. If we are now look at the United States, the hurricane has met the country this night. Well, and there are the estimations that the destruction which is made by this hurricane and also the former hurricane Helene could be roughly 0.5 or 1.1% of GDP in the United States. And well, it's due to climate change, so it has really a large impact on the economic performance. But on the other hand, within our country, the framework should be that we have free markets. So there is right now really a discrepancy. How should we spend our incomes? Okay, so, but what we also see is that in general, without these drops, all relatively this stayed constant. Only if we look at this part here, there we had roughly 10 years with more or less export meat imports. Within these 10 years, between 1990 and 2000, didn't we export that much? Or what is the reason that we, within this time, it was really different? If you think what has happened in these 10 years in Germany, what could be the reason that during almost 10 years exports met imports? via the chat. Reunification, yes. And why was reunification the reason for this? Yes, and what happened then economically? Yeah, great, great. This was the reason. So, within these times, or within these time period, experts still grew, but Germany needed large investments to build up East. East. Oops. So this meant imports really increased. Okay, and then let's go to the last part, the income approach, and this there we will have a quite simple look at the income approach. We only take this distinction again for recapitulation: production, capital, and labor. And if we have only two parts, then of course, if we want to calculate a relative number, we need only to calculate one, because the other one is then 100% minus this number. And what you are then calculating is the so-called labor share. So we sum up all the compensations for employees, and now again this is calculated relative to national income, different from GDP. And how this evolved in the last 50 years, there you see, well, roughly these 2/3 with a fluctuation, let's say plus minus yeah, 5 percentage points. And why is it fluctuating? Well, especially if you look at the other part, so the corporate and investment incomes, this is more or less the stock market. And the stock market, of course, is fluctuating much more, and therefore this number also have to fluctuate. But in general, we could say that it is more or less constant in Germany, 2/3, or you can also take roughly 70% or something like this. And well, this part is always also quite often in the political discussion, because then it is sometimes said when the economic performance is quite good, quite often it is said, well, everything goes to the profits of the companies and nothing or much less is coming to the employees. And therefore, we should make in a political way a distortion, paying that for example, the companies should pay more taxes. And then again, we have the argumentation the other way around. If we have to pay by the companies high taxes, then they won't be relatively drop in their competition compared to the other countries. So in the future, they wouldn't earn that much. And well, how this will develop in Germany, this will be also very interesting in the next years when we have our polls and which government we will have then in a year. Yeah. Oops. Oh, here I put the wrong slides on it. This is in half an hour when I have the German lecture. But I think we are in the end then. Is it cut? No, oops. Are we? I need just the English one. Boop, boop, boop. Have I copied the wrong one? There it is. There we have it. Oops. And I only need then this slide. Here we are. So next week, then we want to start after we have this general description of our economy, now also with the numbers, so circular flow and GDP and the parts of GDP. And now we want to talk about the general economic performance of the main indicators we are looking. And in this case, we are not only looking at GDP growth. This would be the aim here. There I talked about it, that this is a general aggregate for economic performance. But we have, unfortunately, that this part with which we want to measure welfare is, of course, driven by other economic aggregates. And of course, when we are going to the supermarket, when we go shopping, it is very interesting for us how much we have to spend, how expensive are our products. So we will talk about inflation, and for this we say that we want to control more or less the general price development, that it is quite stable. This means this doesn't mean that a single product shouldn't change in price, but that in general we have the aim that we have the price level to be more or less constant. Maybe you know this already. In developed countries, we say roughly the inflation should be around 2%. And then we will talk about it. Why is it a good, or why is this our aim, that the fluctuation of the price level is not that large? And then, of course, an aim would be that the labor market is performing quite well, so a high level employment. And in general, this is a highly discussed aim in general. Should we have or not the aim of an external balance, so that exports should meet imports? And for Germany, we already can say that we don't have this aim. And why we don't have this aim, for this we will also talk about this. And all this together, we define this as the so-called magic square, because all these four aims have interdependencies between these aims, and especially we can say that sometimes to meet one aim means that we could not meet the other aim in the amount we wanted to have. And yeah, then next week we start talking about this magic square. And also, if you have already looked in some books, especially in the English books, you won't find this concept of a magic square in English books, but you will of course find that you look in the economic performance, on economic growth, on inflation, on unemployment, and the development of the external balance. The reason for this is that, after the Second World War in Germany, we especially developed this concept, and this is really special for Germany. In Germany, you find this aim system also in our law, but you won't find it in other countries. But looking at all these economic aggregates, this you will find in every other lecture or textbook. Okay, so then thank you very much for today, and we see next week.